Hello everyone, we're officially transitioning from year 9 to year 10 of The Trail Went Cold, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to do a very special bonus feed drop. You might know that for the past few years, I've been doing a spin-off podcast called The Path Went Chilly, in which myself and two other co-hosts named Jules and Ashley take a fresh look at cases that I've previously covered on The Trail Went Cold and discuss them. We're nearing our 4-year anniversary as a show, and since Jules has been delving into the field of statement analysis, we recently decided to do something a little different from the norm and released a new series of episodes about the 1985 disappearance of 12-year-old Martha Jean Lambert, which I covered over 4 years ago on episode number 191 of The Trail Went Cold. As you might recall, 24 years after Martha went missing, her older brother David confessed to killing her to the police, but he later recanted his confession. And since Martha's remains have still never been found, we have no idea if David was actually telling the truth. However, since the police interrogation video of David's confession is available on YouTube, I transcribed a section of it and sent it to Jules. I did not tell her any details about the case, and she provided a statement analysis of the confession to share her thoughts about whether or not she believed it sounded legitimate. This particular episode is part 1, where Jules breaks down the confession and provides her analysis, and in part 2, I will finally share the full details of the case with Jules, and we discuss whether or not it changes her original analysis. So if you like this episode, we encourage you to seek out The Path Went Chilly and listen to part 2 of our series of episodes about the disappearance of Martha Jean Lambert. The episode was originally released on January the 16th, 2025, but we'll provide a link to it in our show notes. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this and feel compelled to check out The Path Went Chilly. So welcome back to our latest series of The Path Went Chilly. We're recording this just a few days before Christmas, and once again, since Ashley is busy, she has a newborn baby and a family to take care of, it's just going to be me and Jules doing this particular episode. But we're going to do something a little different from the norm, because I'm not going to say the case we're covering right now, because at the moment, Jules doesn't even know it. I have deliberately not told her any details about it, except provided her with a statement that was said by one of the people connected to this case, because Jules is going to be performing a statement analysis in this episode. Jules, you want to tell everyone what that is?
Yes. Okay, so statement analysis has been something I've been interested in since I started Riddle Me That years ago. I no longer do the podcast, but one person that I'd interviewed for one of my episodes was Mark McClish, and he was the most interesting person that I interviewed. I thought it was so fascinating how you could break down just simple words that we take for granted, how they're put together, and punctuation, pronouns used, time references, and you could deduce whether something is false or whether it's true. It's a pretty simple system, and when I was interested in learning about the technique, I reached out to Mark, and he let me do the training for free. He was incredibly supportive. He looks at statements for me whenever I have something that I have a question when I'm practicing. Unfortunately for this one, our timing just didn't really align, so he couldn't double check my work. So I want to preface this and say I was certified, but I am in no way an expert here. There could be some of you listening who know far more than I do, and that's okay. You can have your opinion on the way that this is structured, and in the show notes, we'll provide the statement. So if you want to go and do your own analysis, you're more than welcome to. And I just want to give you guys a little bit of information about who Mark McClish is. So he's literally written the book. He's written 3 of them. One of them is Don't Be Deceived. The other one is I Know You're Lying, and 10 Ways to Spot a Liar. So he's a grandfather in the industry. He spent 26 years in law enforcement. He worked in the Secret Service as well as the Marshal Service, and he spent a great deal of time training in statement analysis because he was the lead instructor on interview techniques, and that's where he developed the system of statement analysis. He also worked on developing the software that would detect deception in statements. So he retired in 2009 as a supervisory deputy U.S. Marshal. So he now gives presentations on statement analysis, as well as providing training to military and law enforcement agencies. Another fun fact about him, I think it's Taekwondo that he's a black belt in. I think he was like head of ground training techniques or something related to that. So our own Ashley Wellman has a black belt in Taekwondo. So I just thought that was an interesting tie-in.
I actually didn't even know that about Ashley, so that took me by surprise. So that's cool to hear. So when you interviewed Mark McClish on Riddle Me That, was it in relation to any particular case, or was it just a general conversation about statement analysis?
No, I believe this was like 4 years ago or something at this point, maybe even 5. But I believe it was the Faith Hedgepeth case. And the 911 call, I believe, was what we went over.
And what's interesting is that's a case there has since been an arrest, and it turned out not to be Faith's roommate who made the call, but rather a completely random predator who was never on the radar as a suspect. So it would be kind of interesting to go back and listen to that and see how much his analysis was close to the facts.
Yeah, and I think there can be a lot of different things that can go into why somebody is reacting the way that they are with a 911 call. But I think a lot of us, when looking at that case, were wrong. I know I was wrong. I thought that there had to have been some involvement of the roommate, given her behavior, the fact that it was unlocked, and the way that she spoke on that 911 call, and then what seemed like a lack of cooperation with law enforcement. I don't know if it was a lack of cooperation or just the fact that she wasn't talking to the press. She wasn't giving any statements. And so we were left to wonder, and all we really had to go off of was that 911 call.
Yeah, and it's been different in varying cases where sometimes a 911 caller was guilty and other times they were completely innocent. You just kind of can't react to how people are going to act in that particular situation. But the good news about the case we're going to talk about is it's still unsolved, so we still can't technically know if Jules' statement analysis is going to be right or wrong because the truth is still murky. So what we did is I deliberately didn't tell Jules any details about the cases. I just gave her a 1-paragraph statement that was made by someone connected to this case in a police interrogation room. And without knowing any of the context of what he was talking about, any details of the case, she performed a statement analysis on what he said. So what we'll do is we'll read the statement, and then Jules will give her own statement analysis. And when she's done, I will provide her the context of when this statement was made and then share all the details about the featured case. And then we'll find out at the end if Jules has changed her opinion or not, or if she still thinks she's right on the money. So I'm just going to read the statement out word for word now. And all I'll just say is that this is made by an individual while they're in a police interrogation room. So let me just pull it up here. So here it is, word for word. Oh, I think it was in the original one you sent me yesterday, so I'll just pull that up. I just got your final one now. Thought I just want to get the word for word one. Okay, so I'm going to read it word for word, and I'm going to bleep out the name of the victim here, because we don't want to give that away. Quote, okay, basically, the truth of the matter is, me and blank went to the old college, and we got in a big argument and fight, and it was over money that she wouldn't give back to me. It was some change of a $20 bill. She hauled off and punched me. I then, not thinking, pushed her. When she fell backwards, her head impaled on something sharp sticking out of the ground. I then said, are you all right? I run over to her, and she just mimed a little bit, and there was nothing else. I hollered out for help, too, 'cause Holmes Boulevard is right there. Nobody came, nobody yelled back or anything. I didn't want to leave her. I freaked out. I said I don't know what to tell you all. I couldn't tell you all. I just freaked. So I, not thinking, I freaked. I tripped. I just didn't know what to do. I buried her. I didn't know what to do. It was the wrong thing to do, I agree. But I was 14 years old. I wasn't thinking. I came home after that, but she was dead. Definitely dead before I buried her. That I know because I checked her stomach and all that. Then after that, I sat there for about 30 minutes. 30 to 45 minutes. Just didn't know what to do. I went home. I got cleaned up. I regret it. I'm sorry it did happen. I regret pushing her. I wish I could go back in time and not have done that. I wish I could turn time. If I could turn time back, I wouldn't just, It was all over money, and you know what money will do to you when you're a kid. I don't know. You were a kid. You had a certain amount of money. The money was valuable to you then, But that's the way it was with me when I was a kid. Every dime I got, I depend on, because most stuff like that, I had to work for. So, Jules, let's hear your statement analysis on this.
Oh, this is just the most bizarre statement. I mean, right from the jump, as soon as I started reading it, I'm like, okay. It starts with, okay, basically. So, like, we're already looking at a problem because we're not just hearing the truth, we're hearing basically what happened. And so I'm going to analyze, okay, basically, the truth of the matter is me and blank went to the old college. That part first. Okay. So, okay, the subject is taking time to think about what they're going to say. So statements like, I swear to God, or like the subject used here, the truth of the matter, often indicate deception. There's an obvious need to convince, and it doesn't always mean deception. If someone like feels as though they aren't being believed, they may use these declarative statements. I don't know the discourse between the interviewer and the subject prior, but to me personally, from the jump, we're looking at like a high probability of deception, as this isn't a good start. The use of the word, like I said, basically, it's suspect. Is this what happened, or is it basically what happened? It could potentially indicate withholding of information, or that this isn't at all what happened and it's just a fabrication. The subject mentions the old college. What's the old college? We know this is familiar since he used the definite article with the rather than a. So is this his old college? The location's vague, but perhaps this is somewhere known to everyone in the area, but the lack of where within the college that they ended up, it just isn't giving enough details. There's withholding of specifics, such as where did you go in the old college and what was the objective?
Well, when I start sharing details about the case, I'll go more into what the old college was, and you'll find out that this was a place that was close to where this supposed crime took place, and that the police did check out the site of the supposed old college, but found no corroborating evidence to support this person's story. But yeah, it is kind of a bad sign, especially when you learn the full context, that he's starting it off by just using phrases like, basically, and the truth of the matter, and you just kind of feel like he's trying to find the right words to explain what happened, even though if he's telling the truth, this probably shouldn't be needing to do this.
And unfortunately, I feel like this sets the tone for the entire statement.
Yeah, exactly, because I remember watching it for the first time, because I covered this one on The Trail Went Cold several years ago, and when I watched the interrogation, I had these feelings that you did immediately.
So the next part that we're going to cover, the next line, is we got in a big argument and fight, and it was over money that she wouldn't get back to me. So the use of the word we indicates a partnership of some kind. So I'd say that there's a high probability that they didn't just meet that night. If they are indeed acquainted, they were known to each other prior to the events that would end her life. And I find this interesting that the subject says big argument and fight. Typically, one would say one or the other. It's possible that in this person's personal dictionary, an argument is verbal and a fight is physical. The interviewer should definitely probe further here, and the subject says that the woman in question wouldn't give back money, but never says how she came into possession of that money. He never says that she took it from him or stole it or even that he lent it to her. We are only getting part of the story here. And don't you find that a little bizarre?
I do, yes, because once we learn the background of this person, it just seems very odd that they would be in possession of money at this particular time. And that's one of the story that has always been kind of a red flag to me. And I do see this sometimes where someone confesses to a murder and they always say, well, I didn't intend to kill this person. It was just a thing where we got into an argument and a fight and they fell over and hit their head. And there was one case that I covered on The Trail Went Cold a couple years ago about the disappearance of a woman named Bethany Decker, who was killed by her boyfriend Ronald Roldan. And they never found her remains, but there was a compelling circumstantial evidence against him to charge him with murder. And one of the terms of the plea deal that was offered is that he would have to make a statement in court, a full confession about what happened. And even though he did, the victim's family was not satisfied because he used the whole thing, well, we got into a fight and I pushed her and she hit her head and I didn't mean to. And they've always been skeptical of that because this guy was known for having a history of violence and abuse. And because they couldn't find her remains, they can't really prove or disprove his story. But they still kind of feel that, yeah, that's his way of like deflecting responsibility, where he tries to say that he didn't mean to kill anyone and that it was only an accident. And that could very well be the case here as well.
I mean, I will say here, like, I've gone back and forth for sure on whether or not this is completely fabricated and a false confession, or this is completely fabricated and this person is indeed responsible. By the time we get to this, I may change my mind again, because there's so much in here that says this is all fabricated. But there is just a few little nuggets that give me pause, and we'll get to that. But the money thing is definitely one of them. If he is indeed responsible, that money is not the motivation, because there's just the lack of specificity. And you'd think if money was so important, you would give us an amount.
Yes, and I've always felt the same thing about this particular person. I don't have a concrete opinion on whether or not they're guilty, but I do believe that if they are, then the statement that they're making here is not the truth about what actually happened.
And think about when you're telling a story. A true story, it should flow from memory. But this story has a lot of pauses. Like when you're looking at the transcript, there's a lot of ... and there isn't a flow. It's disjointed and there's a lot of fragments, and that shouldn't really be happening if it's coming from memory. And if it is an incident where somebody lost their life and you're saying that you pushed her, okay, well, if this resulted in her death, you'd think that he would remember that.
I think so, yeah. Like, once you learn the full context, you would pretty much realize, like, this is one of the most memorable experiences that would have taken place in this person's life. So you think he would recall details a lot more vividly.
Exactly. Typically, when you're telling a story, it shouldn't be something that requires that much effort. You often see that in deceptive statements. And I mentioned the money earlier. He doesn't tell us how much money. He doesn't tell us how she got that money. And that seems like a very odd thing to me, especially when he's telling us that is his primary motivation for this fight. He jumps into the next part of the story. There isn't a lead up about why or what led up to the fight. Or he doesn't say something to the effect of, she took the money, I confronted her, and she punched me. Rather, out of the blue, she hauled off and punched me. The language used here is odd. Did she out of nowhere punch him, as he suggests? Or was she defending herself? There's definitely a withholding of information here, in my opinion. And then he says, I then ... So he's pausing to think about how he's going to phrase this. If he was recalling it from memory, there wouldn't be the need to pause incessantly and rephrase as he does throughout. So this version of events seems deceptive with the quote, I then ... not thinking ... pushed her. Think about recalling of events such as this. If you were punched in the face, you may react by pushing back. The pause and the inclusion of not thinking makes me believe there's a potential that this isn't at all how the events transpired and that this is deceptive, just like we've seen throughout the statement. And notice how casual not thinking is and how devoid of emotion the story is, considering the gravity of it. The tone doesn't match the actions, and that's something to look out for.
Yes, the whole thing about the $20 bill has always been a red flag for me, because when you hear the full context of who these people are, it does seem unlikely that they would have been in possession of a $20 bill at this particular time. So it does sound like he's thrown that detail into the story, possibly to mask what he really did, like the real truth behind her death. And also, when you learn the full context of when he's making this confession, I mean, people are going to act differently when they're confessing to the worst thing they ever did. But I do think that this is a context where he probably would be a lot more emotional. But I've seen the actual police interrogation video where he makes this confession, and he does do it in a very flat, unemotional tone most of the time. And you're kind of wondering, if this was true, then I would expect like a lot more emotion from him.
Yeah, the tone is very incongruous with what you would expect. You would expect there to be a lot of emotion when you're recalling something like this. But there isn't that. And he uses a lot of passive language as well, which is something to look out for. Like, you know, she fell. It's like, no, she didn't fall. You pushed her, and that's why she ended up where she was, if you're to be believed. So the next line we're going to analyze is she fell backwards and her head ... When she fell backwards, her head impaled on something sharp sticking out of the ground. So, like I just said, she didn't fall backwards. This is passive language, and it's used to minimize. So the subject admits to pushing her backwards. But then he doubles down and takes himself out of the statement by following it up again, when she fell backwards. This shows a lack of responsibility and distancing. So rather than being like, when I pushed her backwards and she fell, he's like, when she fell backwards, as if this was something that happened independent of anything that he did. And so I'm curious what he was going to say when he said, quote, she fell backwards and her head ...
It is true. Like, if you see this sentence in just a void, it's making it sound like he's saying that she fell accidentally, like she tripped, and that he never touched her. But then you see the full context, and he says, we got into a fight, and I pushed her. But at that particular point, it does sound like he's deflecting responsibility, saying that, well, it's not really my fault. I only gave her a light shove, and she's the one who fell backwards and caused the fatal injury to her head. So yeah, it makes you wonder, is he kind of deflecting responsibility from what he did, or is this just not 100% true?
Yeah, like he's not saying I impaled her head, that he's saying she fell backwards. Like taking himself out of that statement completely. And he just doesn't claim responsibility, and he makes it the fault of the inanimate object. Like, that inanimate object impaled her. I didn't. You know, like, it's not like he's saying, you know, it was my fault, this happened, and her head was impaled as a result of my actions. He's really trying to take himself out of the statement and make it sound like an accident. So the next part is, he said, I then said, are you all right? He doesn't seem panicked when recalling, which should be like a really visceral and emotional situation where most people would rush to her side right away before asking, are you all right? I think if you were to tell a story about an event and it was an accident, would you include something like this? I don't know. It's not a typical flow of events during a chaotic moment, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I always wonder how many of these incidents actually happen where someone is pushed and then just by pure luck, or bad luck, they wind up getting their head impaled on something sticking out of the ground. Like, you hear more details about this exact location where this allegedly took place, and you're thinking to themselves, man, the odds of her falling down at this one spot that had a sharp object sticking out of the ground just seems very remote. It just seems like one of those 1 in a million things that could happen. So it makes you wonder, is he deflecting responsibility and making this up to kind of rid himself of his own culpability and what happened? And the fact that he's asking, are you all right? Like you said, it just seems like a weird thing to say if you saw someone fell and potentially hit their head on something which caused an injury and killed them instantly. And it's almost like, if this isn't what actually happened, it's him once again deflecting responsibility, saying that, hey, I didn't mean to kill her. I actually asked her if she was okay. So that means it was just an accident and this wasn't premeditated or anything. So it makes you wonder, yeah, is he just changing the details to kind of deflect on what he actually did do?
So the next line that we're going to analyze is, I run over to her and she just mimed a little bit and there was nothing else. So we've got a bit of a problem here at the beginning. I run should be I ran. So present tense is often indicative of deception in a statement. And why would you run over to her? Like, how far away could she be? The subject isn't a superhero that could, like, push her 100 meters away. He admitted he pushed her. So it shouldn't require a run. It should be a step or two, should it not?
Yeah, like if they got into like an altercation where he shoved her and she fell over, like she's not going to fly like 100 feet away. Like he's not going to need to run over. She's going to be very close to him.
Interesting, he uses the word just a lot. This is the first time we see it in the statement, but he uses it quite a bit. And it's what's referred to as a unique word, and it can often indicate withholding of information. So when he says, she just mimed a little bit, I question if that's indeed accurate. Like, what does he mean by mimed? It's an odd phrase in the context of someone lying there and dying. Why would it not make more sense that she raised her arms and waved her fingers? There's something soft about mimed, and that can indicate deception in this context. So if she is indeed dead, which it seems like she potentially is with there was nothing else, wouldn't we see more panic, more grief, regret, remorse? There's a very casual telling of events that potentially ended someone's life, and that's troubling. There likely was something else, and he's potentially leaving that out of the statement.
Yeah, getting back to use of the word mimed, I will say that the audio quality on the police interrogation video isn't the best, so I had to watch that part 6 or 7 times while I was making the transcript because I had to be absolutely sure what word he used because I couldn't figure out what he was saying at first. And then once I watched it a few times, it's like, oh, he's saying mimed, which even so is just a very weird phrase to go in there, just saying that she kind of mimed and looked like she was alive for a few seconds before she died. And that is just a very odd phrase to use when you're making a confession to being responsible for someone's death. And the way he said, like, there was nothing else, like, he doesn't even make it sound like he panicked a lot, that this person who he caused their death and he didn't even like get down much and like try to see if she was okay or move her body or anything like that. He just says she moved her head and then she stopped, and I took that immediately as an indication that she was dead. And of course that could be a sign that he's totally fabricating this story and this isn't what happened.
I would think if it was unintentional and this was a complete accident, like you pushed her and her head impaled on something sharp, which I don't believe him at all. But if that was indeed the case, you would see some shock, because that is a very normal response when something like that happens, that it's an accident, and you realize that you unintentionally ended somebody's life by your actions. But he's not shocked. We're not seeing any emotional reaction. And that leads me to believe that like pretty much everything he's saying so far is deceptive. Okay, so the next line we're going to analyze is, I hollered out for help too. Because Holmes Boulevard is right there. Nobody came. Nobody yelled back or anything. So I question, what year is this? Did they have cell phones? Landlines? Because I hollered out for help too. So the inclusion of two is interesting, as if he hollered in addition to something else. Also, why is he hollering for help on the street? I don't know like where this college is located. Is it rural? Did he not have access to a neighbor's home? A phone? I don't know, this is incredibly suspect. And if someone heard his cries, wouldn't they approach him in a vehicle or on foot? Why would they holler back? So I question if he did indeed holler as he claims. Like here, this appears deceptive and quote, nobody came, nobody yelled back or anything. Like I just said, like, why would somebody yell back? Wouldn't they see you and come to you? Like, what were you hoping to achieve just by randomly hollering? Notice that he doesn't say he waved his hands and jumped up and down and ran in front of an approaching car. So we're to believe that he just wandered onto the street and started hollering? In my opinion, this is deceptive and it never transpired.
Well, without giving away the exact year just yet, I will say that this was the pre-cell phone era, so he wouldn't have had one. There would have been payphones around, but I don't have any information about where the nearest payphone would have been to this location. And I'll just say that this incident supposedly took place at night, and it was in an outdoor area, but I don't think it was all that far from many other houses or many other places to get help. It wasn't like it was in a rural area or anything. So if he really wanted to get help, I don't think he would have had to have run far to the nearest house in order to call for emergency or medical assistance or call to the nearest payphone. So yeah, that does strike me as odd that he hollers out for help and no one comes, and then after that he doesn't do anything else. He makes no attempt to find help for this person that he supposedly killed.
And do you notice what's missing throughout too? Like while he tells this story, he's talking about what happened. There's nothing else, she was dead, and how he's panicking. And he doesn't say, so I got up, I ran out of the college, I ran onto the road, I was jumping up and down and waving my hands. He doesn't tell you what he's physically doing. He just says, I was there and I was hollering. It just seems like if you were going to fabricate a story, that is how you would fabricate it. Because if you were going to be recalling something from memory, you would be saying what you physically did. It would be imprinted in your memory because there would be so much emotion tied to the fact that this individual lost their life, like he's playing it off as an accident. But no matter what the motivation he had, or if indeed this was premeditated murder, or if it was an accident, or if he's even responsible, I would think that there would be like just an urgency and heightened emotional state, shock. The recall wouldn't be so casual, don't you think?
I think so, yeah, that even if he was fabricating the story to cover up his own complicity, that he would at least throw in some details, just saying that I looked for cars, but there was no one around. I went to a neighbor's house and knocked on the door, but there was no one home. Like, make it look like he tried to do more to try to save this person's life. But instead he just casually says, I yelled, I hollered, but no one came. So that just really sounds like he had to come up with this story on the fly or something like that. And just because it wasn't actually the truth, it doesn't have any details to add to the believability of it.
So the next line that we're going to analyze is, I didn't want to leave her, ... I freaked out, ... I didn't, ... I said I don't know what to tell you all. It's possible that he didn't know what to do and he did freak out, but he says, quote, I didn't, and trails off. I'm really curious what he was going to say there. There is an I didn't, and he trails off with what didn't he do? This is a pattern, like where he starts a sentence and then it goes against what I would assume is his better judgment to continue, and he rephrases. So this can definitely be indicative of deception. So it's interesting that he says, quote, I said I don't know what to tell you. He's not saying I don't know what to tell you, but that he said that I said I don't know what to tell you. He's not saying I don't know what to tell you, but that he'd already said that. And it's not an equal statement. They're two very different things. It's also an odd statement since they're asking for his version of events, and that should come from memory. So the fact that he doesn't know what to say is interesting. Also, he's using past tense as if he said this to them before, but since I only have a piece of the interview, it is possible that they had discussed this.
Yes, I'm going to talk more about this when we share the details of the case, but there were prior conversations between the person making this statement and the police, and there was an additional person in the interrogation room at this point that he's telling to the first time. So that kind of is how this statement comes in here. But once you learn the full details about why he's making this statement, you're going to think that, wow, he should really be more emotional or have better recall or more details. But just the way that he's just casually saying, I didn't know what to do, I freaked out. But he isn't giving like more urgency. He's making it sound like even though this was an accident, he wasn't responsible. He just like kind of had this attitude that, well, she's dead, nothing I can do about it.
All right, so the next line that we're going to analyze is, I couldn't tell you all. I just freaked out. So I ... not thinking ... I freaked ... I tripped ... I just don't know what to do ... I buried her. So when he says, I couldn't tell you all, I believe him. I personally believe that the truth is leaking out here. He can't tell the investigators everything, and that's why we're seeing so much withholding. Either he isn't responsible at all, and he doesn't have the details, and that's why he's withholding, or he's fabricating. And perhaps the truth of the events are far worse, and he fears that the truth could impact many things, from the way that investigators view him to the type of sentence that he may receive. If, say, for example, sexual assault was included in the crime, or, like I said, he can't tell them because he simply doesn't know. He again uses the word just with I freaked out, indicating that he is potentially withholding on his actions surrounding her death and that he did more than, quote, freak out. He again says that he wasn't thinking, and another use of just with I just don't know what to do. He's again withholding. Also ask yourself, if the end result is you bury someone, this seems very calculated and well thought out. One has to move the body, get it to a vehicle, find a shovel, transport the body, and then dig a hole and bury the individual. The way that he tells the story, he just skips over all those details. And don't you find that a little bit perplexing?
I do, and I'm not giving anything away because in a couple moments we're going to analyze this statement, but the person did say his age out loud when he said this incident took place, and when you hear this person's age, you're thinking, this is not someone who just casually decides to bury a body, and if they did, they would not be so careful about it, and so, cautious that the victim's remains would not be found for many, many years. And it is kind of weird that he just says, I picked up he does later on, he gives like a more detailed version about how he buried, but the fact that he's not providing specific details in this particular statement is a bit telling, because, most people, once they're in a situation like this, are just not going to casually say within seconds or minutes, oh, okay, I did this bad thing, I'm going to have to bury someone, and just have the wherewithal to do it successfully. So I've always felt that this is the most troubling part of the confession, which doesn't hold water to me.
It absolutely doesn't hold water. I think if you were going to dispose of a body, like you said, at the age of the potential perpetrator here, it would be very, very difficult for them to be able to get the implements and just to be able to execute burying a body and to know what to do. This is pre-internet age. They're not Googling how to dispose of a body or like where to do it. So it's very, very strange. And again, if you're deciding to bury the body of somebody that you're saying that like they fell backwards and impaled their head, and that you're leading us to believe that this was an accident, then there should be more emotion attached to this, not just, I buried her. There's nothing there. It's devoid of any shock, any grief, any remorse. There's no regret. There's just nothing. It's flat.
Exactly. When you hear the full context about what the relationship was between this person making the statement and the person who died, this just seems more unbelievable. And I'll just say that if I was the age of the person who's making this statement and I had accidentally killed someone, I can tell you that my brain at that time would not have instantly gone to bury the body and cover it up within seconds or minutes after it happened. And I'm sure you probably say the same thing.
No, I mean, my brain wouldn't have gone there either. But I suppose there are those individuals, if you're, there's the birthing of a serial killer or something like that, then perhaps they'd fantasize about a scenario such as that. And in fantasizing about those scenarios, they'd considered body disposal. I have no idea, but I assume we can't apply our thought process to the way that somebody who could be a killer, and especially if their objective was to murder, then we're not going to be thinking in the same way that somebody whose thought process is like that would.
Well, when you learn more about this person's background, I can say he does not seem like a young Dexter Morgan in training. He doesn't seem like the type of person who would kill someone just for the thrill of doing it, just to see if he can get away with it. So I'm thinking that if he was guilty, he had an entirely different motive, rather than just because he was a budding serial killer.
Dexter was who I thought of. Have you started watching the new Dexter?
I know I haven't, but I remember the original series when they did flashbacks to him as a kid and his father trying to groom him to like, well, if you're going to be a serial killer, at least kill other serial killers so you can get that rage out in positive ways.
Dexter Original Sin is so good. You should watch it. It sticks so close to the source material, uses the same type of musical score, and Michael C. Hall does the narration, and every character on there has the either exact same looks or vibes as their inspiration from the original Dexter. It's really good.
Okay, I'll have to check it out.
All right, so the next line that we're going to do is, I didn't know what to do. It was the wrong thing to do. I agree. Again, he says, I didn't know what to do. For someone who didn't know what to do, doesn't burying someone seem like a well thought out endgame after a murder? So it doesn't seem like one would casually stumble into it like we mentioned. His statements are incongruous to the actions that he took. So what is the it in it was the wrong thing to do? Is he referencing a murder, a rape, an accident? He doesn't say. He just agrees that it was wrong.
Yes, I think that when you look at this person's age when this incident allegedly happened, you're going to think that a normal person, if they accidentally killed someone, if they're going to panic and freak out, they're probably going to do something like run away and leave the body behind and just pray that no one finds the body, or just think, well, if they find the body, I'll just say that I didn't do it. They're not going to instantly go to, I'm going to cover this up by burying her, because this is an era when they did not know about DNA yet, so no one at that age, at that time, is going to be thinking, well, if they find the body, they're going to find my DNA on them, so I better bury her. That doesn't really fit the scenario at all. So I do agree that it contradicts where he says, I didn't know what to do, yet he knows to bury the body.
Okay, so the next line that we're going to do is, but I was 14 years old. I wasn't thinking. I then ... I came home after that, but she was dead. He says over and over how he wasn't thinking, but his actions appear to be calculated. I then, which he says is often indicative of withholding of information, then is skipping over what preceded it, and the ... or pause, where he rephrases, it's likely a spot where something happened that he's excluding from the statement. And this again seems out of order. I came home after that, but she was dead. Firstly, what is the that he's referring to? And secondly, didn't he say he buried her already? So stating that she was dead seems redundant, since it's out of order, and one often sees this in deceptive statements.
Well, now we're at the point when he reveals his exact age at the time this incident took place, which is 14 years old. And I'm sure you're all thinking to yourself, it seems very out of character for a 14-year-old to just have the wherewithal to bury a victim only minutes after they allegedly killed them. And like you said, it contradicts where he keeps saying, I wasn't thinking, but he was thinking enough that he was going to bury the victim in order to cover up his crime. So it's a very crazy contradiction. And he says, I came home after that, and like I'm wondering, what is the that he's referring to? Because if it was just like an accident and a burial, it just seems that weird that he would throw it in there like that. Makes you wonder, did something else actually happen and he did go home after it took place, but it isn't the incident as he outlined it here in his confession?
So the next line that we're going to do is, definitely dead before I buried her. That I know because I checked her stomach and all that. So notice how there was no she was. So when he takes her out of the statement, this is sensitive. So pay attention. So if he did indeed bury her, I would wonder if she was dead. Because the fact that she's taken out of there and he uses the fragment, definitely dead before I buried her, is really bizarre. So what does he mean by, quote, that I know because I checked her stomach and all that? Firstly, one typically checks a pulse. Does he mean that he watched her chest to see if it went up and down? But we cannot extrapolate. We can only go off what people say. So I'm curious if there's any injuries to the stomach, or why is he focusing on that rather than the pulse or her breathing or lack thereof? And the quote, all that, is he implying that he did other things that are lower on her body than her mouth or her chest, since he references the stomach? But he's not telling us what they are. So we can't be sure that he did anything at all to check to see if she was alive. So the use of the word that is interesting. It's distancing language rather than this. He says that. This whole portion of the statement, in my opinion, seems potentially fabricated. This whole statement seems fabricated thus far.
Yeah, I've always found that detail weird, that the only thing he says is I checked her stomach, like nothing about checking her pulse, and I guess he's trying to imply that he wanted to see if she was still breathing, if her stomach was moving. But you notice that the one thing he never mentions in the confession is checking her actual head, because if someone fell down and hit their head out of a sharp object sticking out of the ground, I mean, I'm assuming if it happens so fast that you may not even notice that sharp object. You're just going to see her landing her head and then wonder why she's not getting up. Yet he never mentions anything about pulling her head up just to double check if there was any sort of injury here. It's like he has such great vision that at night he was able to tell that her head hit a sharp object sticking out of the ground and that it was so deadly that it killed her instantly, so he didn't have to attempt any medical attention or go for help just to get a professional to check if she was still alive.
Oh, but he asked her if she was okay, and then he ran over to her. And it's like, sir, if this is indeed what happened, you would think you're telling a story like that. Somebody fell after you pushed them and they impaled their head. You'd think I ran over to them and I grabbed her head to check and see if she was okay, or her neck to see if she was breathing. She was bleeding. There was no details like that. How did you know that her head was impaled? And he doesn't give, like we said before, with the running, the part about hollering on the street. He doesn't say, like, I got up and I ran out of the college and I ran to the street. He doesn't say, like, I went over and I touched her. And he's lacking any sort of statements on, like, what physical actions he took. It's just so vague. Just saying, I checked, like, her stomach. Who checks a stomach?
Yeah, this really doesn't sound like the actions of a 14-year-old who is genuinely panicked that they killed someone. I mean, I can't say, I've never been in that situation, so I can't say what I would do, but I don't think I would just like say, oh, I'm going to check her stomach. Oh, she's not breathing. She must be dead. And then just leave it at that and then decide to bury her.
I'm going to say that you wouldn't do this, and emotionally, you would have a reaction if somebody accidentally fell backwards, because you have the normal range of human emotions. And we're just not seeing that here. Everything that we're reading so far there's no panic, there's no emotion. It's just like he's describing like what he ate for lunch. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Just seems very casual.
So the next line we're going to analyze is, then after that, I sit there for about 30 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes, just didn't know what to do. So the whole statement, then after that, is very interesting. Each individual word shows missing time and withholding. There's a significant event or events that he's skipping over here. So then shows missing time. After also shows missing time, indicating there was an event preceding it. So we're looking at something that is just incredibly vague. So he's using distancing language with that rather than saying exactly what happened. He's using present tense language with sit there and not sat there. He's recalling a past event, so he should be using past tense language. Present tense language is often in a deceptive statement. So we see the order of the story here, it's out of sync, which we often see time references jumbled up in deceptive statements. He said that he's buried her, and now he's talking about the aftermath of her murder or this accidental death, I guess, saying that he was sitting there for about 30 minutes, which is an interesting choice since statistically, liars often pick the number 3. So this would include 30 minutes, and quote about makes it even less precise. So quote just didn't know what to do. We see the inclusion of the unique word just, and we also see the fact that he took the I out of the statement. So he's distancing himself from responsibility.
Yeah, I always found that weird that he just said, I sit there rather than sat there, even though he's describing an event that took place in the past. And when you just see the full context, it's like so weird that he can be calculated enough to bury this person's body and then run away, yet then be shell-shocked enough afterwards to just sit there between 30 to 45 minutes. And it's interesting, I didn't know that statistically liars often pick the number 3, so I'm guessing this is a common thing where if they have to make up a story and come up with a time frame, they'll usually say like 30 minutes or so. They're just attracted to that word, that number for some reason.
Yeah, 30 minutes, 3 o'clock. Yeah, it's a typical number that liars will pick. I don't know why. So the next line that we're going to analyze is, I went home, I got cleaned up. I regret it. I'm sorry it did happen. I regret pushing her. So he already said that he went home, more out of order statements and time references that are off. So he skips over what he did after sitting there. He says he buried her, but we're getting no information on how or when that transpired. If this is true, he likely did go home and get cleaned up, but he's definitely withholding a great deal of information on what preceded that exactly. And although this sounds really strange, just stay with me. So the use of the phrase cleaned up could indicate sexual activity. So washing, bathing, brushing teeth, these personal cleaning rituals can be indicative of sexual abuse or activity. So I question here, if he is indeed responsible, that the potential motive could be that of rape and not related to the money at all. So quote, I regret it. I question if he does. He's taking what he regrets out of the statement. So how much could he truly be feeling remorse if he can't say exactly what he did that he regrets? Does he regret cleaning up? That's what the sentence structure would have you believe. But clearly he means the death of the victim, but he's not saying that, so I can't be sure. And he doesn't say that it was an accident. He just leaves it out entirely. He uses really strange language here, and he doesn't say, I'm sorry it happened. He uses present tense, I'm sorry it did happen, which isn't the same thing. Is he apologizing for what he did, or is he apologizing to investigators who may be giving him disapproving glances and affirming that it did indeed happen? He's lacked emotion, like we said, through this entire statement, and the way that he chooses to express remorse is suspect. Many killers express remorse, but people who make false confessions would have no reason to be remorseful, aside from wasting time with investigators or getting the family's hopes up. He says that he regrets pushing her, but he doesn't mention that he regrets anything else. Not the fight, not the fact that she died, that he chose to bury her and cover it up, simply that he pushed her. We can only believe he regrets what he tells us that he regrets.
Yeah, the whole statement about him getting cleaned up, when you learn the full context of this case, you're going to wonder, like, is this part even true? I mean, it is possible that there was sexual abuse here that he's not talking about, and that's why he felt the need to clean himself up. Yet at the same time, if he actually buried someone, then obviously he would be pretty dirty and require a lot of cleaning. And when you see the circumstances of how he was living at the time, you would think that someone would have noticed something, that if he had accidentally killed someone and buried their body, there would be a lot more warning signs with him, like he would be covered in dirt, he would be sweaty, and I haven't heard anything to indicate that someone saw him on that fashion on that particular night, which makes me wonder if this entire part of the story is completely fabricated. And it's interesting how he always uses the word her throughout this when describing the victim, like, I regret pushing her, but you'll notice that there was only one moment in the entire statement where I had to bleep out the victim's name, and it's kind of a detached thing where he only uses the victim's name once during the entire statement, and when you hear that, you're like, yeah, that's kind of surprising when you learn the relationship between them, so it's kind of like he's deliberately not using the person's name to distance himself from what he did.
Yeah, that can definitely be indicative of distancing. But if the perpetrator used her name in the beginning, like I remember, I thought this too. I was doing the Scott Peterson interview with investigators and just for practice. And I sent it to Mark. And I was noting every single time that he said her rather than like my wife or Lacey. And I had the exact same thought that you did because I thought, like, if you're continuing to say her rather than saying her name. But he said if her name was used initially, then you can say her. But I still do think that if you're going to go a whole statement and you're only going to use that person's name once, if that person meant something to you and you're indicating that there was a relationship, and earlier on in the analysis I said the we would indicate a partnership, and I thought that these two were known to each other, this wasn't just like a victim of opportunity or a chance encounter, then you would think that somebody who would be remorseful, especially if they're responsible, would be using that person's name. It doesn't feel emotionally appropriate.
Yeah, especially when you learn the full context about why he's saying this.
So the next line is, I wish I could go back in time and not have done that. I wish I could turn time. If I could turn time back, I wouldn't just, I wish I could go back in time and not have done that. Again, what is that? There's a great deal of information that he's withholding, so I think there's a potential that that could refer to rape or murder and not just an accident. He doesn't say accident, and we can only go off what the subject says. So based on his words, this is likely no accident. He doesn't say her name or express regret over her being dead. Notice it's all about him. If I could go back in time, I would just ... Again, he uses the word just. He's withholding information. And he's assuming the interviewer knows. By using this language, he's distancing himself from the act and the potential motivation. He doesn't anywhere say that this was a terrible accident, as I just mentioned. So we have to ask ourselves if there is a possibility that he intended to end her life. He's purposefully vague and, in my opinion, trying to cover up what really happened and what was his true motivation if he was indeed involved.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, the phrasing, I wish I could have gone back in time and not have done that. And I'm thinking, if this was legitimately an accident, that he would say more details, that he would say, if I could do it over again, I would have been certain that she was dead, like I would have gone for help, and maybe if I had acted quicker, I could have saved her life. But it's like he's saying that, I wish I had not done that. That does kind of indicate that maybe he's did something else, but just doesn't want to say it, and then he has great regrets about having done it. But it's just a weird phrasing to use if you are genuinely, not at fault, and it was genuinely an accident.
The next line is, it was all over money, ... And you know what money will do to you when you're a kid. I don't know, ... You were a kid, ... You had a certain amount of money, ... The money was valuable to you then, So he doesn't say what it is. Was it the fight? Was it pushing her? He doesn't say what money does to him. He pushes it onto the detective, trying to relate with the statement. And you know what money will do to you when you're a kid. I don't know, ... You were a kid, ... You had a certain amount of money. The money was valuable to you then, So why are you referencing childhood and money? This seems like a need to distract from what could be a real motivation or what were the real actions that he took. He doesn't say the amount of money that she had in possession. He's so non-specific with the change from $20. So the subject takes himself out of the statement, distancing himself, and further brings the detective in. So he's meandering and loses the plot here. He was 14, not 7. So the reference to him as a kid, is that appropriate? Or do you think that that's to minimize?
Yeah, because that's this whole story, is that they got into a fight over money and that he pushed her accidentally and that's how she wound up dead. So he's pretty much saying that's the entire motivation. And he's trying to make it sound like, oh, if you're a kid or if you're a teenager, that a fight over money can escalate a lot worse than if you're an adult. And that's why they got into a physical altercation, which is kind of odd that she was just trying to justify it, saying, well, you know what it's like if someone steals money from you or doesn't give you the correct money, it can drive you wild. And I'm thinking, really, is a 14-year-old going to act this way over $20? And one thing he doesn't mention in the statement, you'll notice, is that he doesn't say what happened to the actual money, because he says that she didn't give him back the correct change from the $20, but he doesn't mention anything about checking her pockets or anything to collect the money, even though this was supposedly the motivation for her death.
I would go so far as to say that it wasn't, and that he's lying, because it's completely non-specific. Just all the details here are non-specific. He just feels like he's trying to distract. When he's bringing the detective into it, like, how does he know that money was valuable to the detective when he was a kid? He won't take responsibility by saying, when I was a kid, money was valuable to me. He's distancing himself from what he's saying was his primary motivation, which I think is really odd.
Well, I'll just say that once you learn the full context of how this statement is taking place, this statement about the money does make a bit more sense when you realize that it's not just a detective, that there's someone else in the room who is hearing this story. So I think that's why he's just talking about how, you know, that money was valuable to me back then.
That might be the context that I'm missing, because it's just like, why are you meandering on about how you had a certain amount of money when you were a kid to the detective? It's like, why don't you just say, I had a certain amount of money when I was a kid, and that money was very valuable to me. And so I felt under threat when she took this money or whatever. But he doesn't give any details like that. It just feels like an utter fabrication. So the next line is, but that's the way it was when I was a kid. The subject finally references himself as a kid, but again, doesn't say money was important to me as a kid. He keeps it vague with, but that's the way it was with me when I was a kid. Is 14 a kid? I don't know. I think it's more of a teenager, but I guess it depends on the age the subject is when looking back.
Yeah. As we're going to talk about, this is years down the line. So obviously the person saying this is no longer a kid. They are now a grown adult. So that's probably why they were referring themselves to a kid at age 14, even though that would technically make them a teenager. And of course, at that point, they are old enough to know right from wrong.
So I'm not sure if this next one is like a grammatical error or if this is, I'm going to think that it's not, but I'll read the line. Every dime I got, I depend on, because most stuff like that I had to work for. So I depend on is present tense. So I don't know if he's referring to the past or the present. Like right now, money is really important. Like every dime I have, like rather than saying every dime I have, I depend on. He said I got, or does he mean every dime I got past tense at that time? And then he's saying I depend on. I'm thinking that it's the misuse of present tense rather than him speaking about present tense. What do you think?
That's what I'm thinking as well, because he is saying this statement years after the alleged incident took place. And I don't think he would say I depended on every dime I got way back when I was 14 years old. So he's trying to saying that like everything I have right now, I had to work for. So, but he's still trying to use it as a justification for his motivation, saying, you know how hard it is for me to earn money, so you can understand why I would have lost my temper and accidentally killed someone over money back when I was 14 years old.
Yeah, and he goes on by saying, because most stuff like that I had to work for. Most stuff like that you had to work for, like what are we referring to here? Like we're knowing, okay, so he's saying most stuff like that. Is he referring to money? Is he referring to relations with women? He doesn't specify what most stuff like that is.
Yeah, it's kind of weird to me because we really don't know how true this story is. And I don't know if he's trying to say that, like, talk about even how emotional connections had to work for. Because as we're going to find out, this person that he supposedly killed was someone who had a very strong connection to him. And maybe he's thinking about how it was very difficult for me to develop strong relationships with other people. That was something I had to work for. So it could be like a distancing himself again, where he's saying that there's no way I would commit premeditated murder because this person was someone who was close to me.
All right, so I'm going to give my conclusion here. I think the vast majority of the statement, as we've mentioned throughout, is fabricated. The time references are all off, and the events are jumbled. There's missing time all over the place as well. The subject takes himself out of the statement. He uses passive language. The story lacks emotion. The tone is inappropriate. And it seems like he's trying to cloak what could be his real motivation, which, if he is indeed responsible based on these statements, I think could potentially be sexual in nature. But they're definitely not related to the money that he brings up throughout the entire statement. But given the context of the entire statement, it is entirely possible that it could be a false confession, and there are underlying motives or fantasies that drove the subject to confess. There's plenty of use of unique words such as just, and the fact that he doesn't say this was an accident at any point, and he doesn't give clear details. The whole account is vague. He skates over the part about burying her, and he gives no details on what should be a very memorable action taken. This feels like an important part of the story, as is the part where she was impaled, and by what, and like Robin said, he doesn't check her head. He offers no further clues. None of this feels like it's coming from memory. Basically, all of the events in here, in my opinion, seem fabricated. And there's two possibilities here, in my very non-expert opinion. Let's keep this in mind. Number one, this is a false confession by someone who came forward with very few details and no real knowledge of the crime, but they're somehow tied to her. Because, like I said earlier, the use of us indicates a partnership, and I felt as though this is somebody who had known her in her life. Number two, this is a suspect who confessed, but with a completely inaccurate retelling of events in question, reframing them to put himself in a less culpable position. And I go back and forth on these. I'm not even going to say which one that I feel like is more likely, because I think that both options are equally plausible. And I think I'll have an opinion once you tell me the details of the case. But the one thing that I can settle on is this statement is fabricated. It is almost entirely deceptive.
Yeah, well, before we recorded this, you sent me like a draft of your statement analysis, and you just wanted to ask me if I was on the right track. And I said that you were, because when I covered this case on The Trail Went Cold 4 years ago, I pretty much had these same feelings where I wasn't 100% certain about whether the person making this statement was guilty, but either way, I do not believe that this is an accurate account of what actually happened, and that if the person who'd said it was guilty, then the victim's death took place in an entirely different fashion, and that he was not telling the full truth.
If Mark was looking over this statement, you guys would get a way better result where he would tell you probably exactly whether or not this person did it or not. He was lying this entire statement, and I'm really interested to hear the details of the case.
So now this would be a good time to end part one, and part two, I will finally reveal which case it is to Jules and give her the full details, and we can go back over the statement analysis and see if she's changed her mind, or if she still thinks she was dead on what she believed about this statement. So join us for part two of our series about Jules' statement analysis.
Robin, do you want to tell us a little bit about the Trail Went Cold Patreon?
Yes, the Trail Went Cold Patreon has been around for 3 years now, and we offer the standard bonus features like early ad-free episodes, and I also send out stickers and signed thank you cards to anyone who signs up with us on Patreon. If you join our $5 tier, tier 2, we also offer monthly bonus episodes in which I talk about cases which are not featured on the Trail Went Cold's original feed, so they're exclusive to Patreon. And if you join our highest tier, tier 3, the $10 tier, one of the features we offer is a audio commentary track over classic episodes of Unsolved Mysteries, where you can download an audio file and then boot up the original Unsolved Mysteries episode on Amazon Prime or YouTube, and play it with my audio commentary playing in the background, where I just provide trivia and factoids about the cases featured in this episode. And incidentally, the very first episode that I did a commentary track over was the episode featuring this case. So if you want to download a commentary track in which I make more smart-ass remarks about Jewel Kaler, then be sure to join Tier 3.
So I want to let you know a little bit about the Jules and Ashley Patreon. So there's early ad-free episodes of The Path Went Chili. We've got our Path Went Chili minis, which are always over an hour. So they're not very mini, but they're just too short to turn into a series. And we're really enjoying doing those. So we hope you'll check out those Patreons. We'll link them in the show notes.
So I want to thank you all for listening, and any chance you have to share us on social media with a friend or to rate and review is greatly appreciated. You can email us at thepathwentchili@gmail.com. You can reach us on Twitter at thepathwent. So until next time, be sure to bundle up because cold trails and chilly paths call for warm clothing.
Music by Paul Rich from the podcast Cold Callers Comedy.